ABCDC. We're going to be continuing our conversation about marriage, looking in this passage in Ephesians. And I've invited Leslie Hansen to join us for this part of the conversation, because Leslie is a licensed professional counselor. She's been a counselor for 16 years, right? And one of the things that she counsels people in is in marriage and along marriage issues. And so I'm so glad that you're joining with us.
Thank you.
Leslie, I know you're married to Mike Hansen, not the Michael Hansen, not our lead pastor, a different Mike Hansen, a wonderful man. Yeah. And we're just so glad that you are here to share your wisdom with us. And
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks. So in talking about Ephesians 5 specifically, verse 21, really before it even gets into specifically talking about husbands and wives and how they are called to interact together, it talks about how we're called to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. So talk to us about how important that idea of mutual submission is between a husband and wife and how that plays out.
Right. So it's interesting. You provided me with a little bit of direction saying what we were going to be talking about in advance, and I was talking with Mike about it, and I realized how different men think of the word submit versus the way that I think women think of the word submit. So it's funny, Emerson Eggerichs, a pastor and author, wrote about the idea of pink and blue, and he says, women have pink glasses and pink hearing aids and pink megaphones, and guys have blue megaphones and blue glasses and blue hearing aids. So I'm going to speak from a pink megaphone with the hopes that the guys can hear with a little bit of a pink hearing aid.
That's wonderful.
Mutual submission, as I talk with my clients, is the idea of how do we yield to one another? How do we kind of surrender? Even if we don't completely agree, it's the idea, can I still acquiesce to say, you know what, this may not be worth the battle, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it's the idea that we recognize each one of us brings different strengths to the table. If I look at in Mike and I's situation, it's beautiful because when we do cooking at home, for instance, Mike might do the cooking and I do the cleaning. Or sometimes I do the cooking and Mike does the cleaning.
Right.
But there's a certain way to put dishes in the dishwasher.
Right. Oh,
okay?
Right.
There's
only one way to do it.
One way only. Right. So Mike has surrendered or yielded to me on my way of doing things. And even if I do have to sometimes move things around, I don't take offense to the fact that, he did that on purpose to put that in the wrong spot. He surrenders to me. He yields to me. And there are times that I do the same. Like if we're packing for a road trip, I know that Mike has a Tetris mindset that says, I got to pack these things in the right way. Even though I think I could do it just as good, I yield to him. Now, I'm talking about very minor things. These are not big disagreements. And there are other things that are much more significant in people's relationships. And so what I try to always keep in mind is the idea that, are my actions and my behaviors going to be something that draws Mike and I closer and creates a better connection?
Right.
Or is what I'm about to say or do going to hurt him in a way that makes us disconnected?
Right.
So I think mutual submission is the idea of just looking to one another and saying, you have an area of expertise or you have a way of thinking that may not be equal to mine. It's just different. And that's okay.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so important, I think. And you gave some good practical examples, packing the car lunch. And we joke about how those are minor, but the reality is if you're in a marriage where there's tension, all of a sudden those little things actually become really big things. I know my experience is not as much as yours, but when I sit down with couples, sometimes those are the things we end up talking about. And it's realizing like, okay, there's a deeper issue here that's going on. There's a deeper, and we're going to have to dig and figure out what that is. But it does play out in some of those little things that we might say is trivial, or we'll never fight about that, or we're so in love. Those things aren't going to matter. But then when push comes to shove, those things can be the little things that really just kind of irritate us in a relationship. So, but I love what you're talking about, just yielding to the other and knowing their strengths versus my strengths, and that those roles might not always be the traditional roles, right? Like if the husband is a great chef, or the wife is very good with hands and building things. We often think we have to fit people in a box, and then there's that tension when we don't.
Right.
So
I love the idea of when we get a package from like Amazon or something, and it's got like 50 or 100 different pieces. I'm like, let me put that together. And I know Mike's perspective is, oh, we're going to probably end up with a screw in the wrong area. But I love the idea of working with my hands. So he does. He just kind of submits to me on that and says, if you enjoy it, go do it.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
You know, in this passage, you know, there's a couple themes. This idea of love and respect. Specifically, you know, husbands are told to love their wives. Wives are told to respect their husbands. And so just talk about what the differences are of those and the similarities of those and how important they are for husbands and wives to do this with each other.
Yeah. You know, when I think back to the origins of biblical times, at that time, men were much more the hunters, the gatherers, the providers, the protectors, and women were much more of the nurturers, caring for the children, caring for the husband and the household.
Yeah.
Now we come into, 20th century and we got Aretha Franklin, talking about ain't getting no respect.
Yeah.
And we have many more women that are struggling with the idea that I don't feel like I'm getting respect. And the man's struggling with the idea of sometimes, I'm not feeling love, because men have come to terms, I think, a lot more with their ability to be in touch with their vulnerable sides. No matter who it is that's feeling disrespected or feeling unloved, we want to recognize that the love and respect that we are giving to the other person can beget more love and respect. And I think oftentimes I look at it in terms of like an infinity loop.
Okay. Yeah.
So below the surface, on the very bottom of the infinity loop, if Mike's on one side and I'm on the other side, it's the idea of I have feelings and needs. And when those needs aren't met unintentionally, many times, it's the idea of if those needs aren't met, I'm going to feel a certain way. Now, if I'm in an emotionally safe relationship, I can absolutely tell that other person, hey.
I can express that openly, honestly, vulnerably.
I'm feeling like I got dinged. Ouch, that hurts. Can you try again? Can I give you a mulligan so you can do this over again?
Right.
But it's the idea of sometimes if I'm not in a really emotionally safe relationship where I can be super vulnerable, I end up reacting in a way that says, I'm going to be disrespectful, I'm going to be unloving. Again, not intentionally, but these are my automatic reactions. And then it slides over to the other person's side of their infinity loop, and their needs aren't being met. So whatever's going on the inside comes out on the outside. And so you have this automatic negative cycle that's going on. And what I try to do with couples in counseling is to recognize, what is your pattern? What is your core need? Is it I'm not feeling loved, and so I need to feel loved? Is it I'm not feeling respected and I need to feel respected? And if we can try to communicate that in a way where there aren't any really roadblocks, where the other person feels like they have to react in a certain way, because every action gets a reaction, right? So it's the idea of how can we create a positive infinity loop that's going to bless the other person and make us feel like when I look at you, I'm not just looking at you, but I'm looking at Christ inside of you.
Right. That's so good.
And it makes me feel better about myself. I know when I lay my head on the pillow at night, I feel good.
Right. When I'm speaking to my wife, in my case, or you, your husband, when I can take myself out of the frustrating moment and not just react, but be proactive and thinking, hey, I need to speak to them as if Jesus was sitting right in front of me. There won't be any regrets, in what I would say then. And I love the visual of the infinity loop, how that can either be unfortunately a negative cycle or a positive cycle. That if you think of it in a positive way, is that if I'm giving love and respect, that and if both are mutually doing that, then that is just going to feed and build our relationship and meet all the needs that we have. And because Christ is in that, and Christ is present in that space.
Amen.
So that's good. Well, you brought up just talking about kind of negative cycle a little bit. I know this whole past year, has just been a crazy year for everybody. And for some couples, I think whether it's, hey, we're working from home now, I know most people are back to we're getting more back to normal, but
Mm-hmm.
some of us have been working from home together with our spouses, or maybe one one is used to going off to work and one stays home, and now the one is working at home, and for some of them it's been probably a good experience.
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, we're realizing we're getting to see each other a lot more. You're
Right.
not on the road like you used to be. But I know, as I've talked to some couples, it's brought things to the surface that were probably already there,
Right.
but they were just avoiding or being able to kind of get by because of the hustle and bustle of life. And now all of a sudden it's brought things up that have just brought ugliness out in the relationship. So just talk a little bit to that. What have you seen, and what would you say to us if we're in a right now, if we feel like that with our marriage is kind of in that spot?
There have been research studies that say the things that couples are originally arguing about in the first year of marriage are the same things that they're probably arguing about 20, 30, 40 years into marriage. And I think that goes back to the fact that we develop patterns because we don't know how to deal with things.
Right.
I mean, how did you learn how to deal with things? But what did you see in your parents or your caregivers? Mm-hmm. And so you say, well, the way that I deal with things seems very natural to me because it's what I always saw.
Yeah, what was modeled for me.
What was modeled for me, absolutely. So until people start to identify, wow, these are the patterns, they don't know what to deal with. So 2020, okay?
Right.
We've got, I used to go to work. I don't go to the office anymore. I used to have teachers. Now I'm the teacher for my kids.
Right.
I used to be able to go to the movies, go to take a drive around, go to a park, or go to the gym, or go over to a friend's house, or go to a family member's house to kind of escape. I had a pattern of what I would do if things got a little tense around the house. Even I had drive time home to kind of decompress.
Right.
Or I had 9 hours at an office. And a lot of people don't have that any longer. We couldn't go to the gyms. We couldn't go to our friends. We couldn't go to family members. So a lot of their coping mechanisms were taken away in this past year. So a lot more of their issues have come out into the present, and it's pushing people a lot more. Right. And I kind of look about, do you remember Chinese finger traps?
Yes.
Okay.
You can't get
the bamboo
out. You put them in, you
shoots.
can't get them out, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I kind of think of marriage and tension in marriage as kind of like a Chinese finger trap. Okay. So it's the idea of, you put your fingers in and you're kind of having a little bit of an argument. And one person commonly is more of a pursuer and one person's a little bit more of a distancer. But you can have two pursuers or two distancers in a relationship. So you put your fingers in, you're starting to go at it, and it's the idea of, whoa, I need to get out, Yeah. And so you start pulling out, and what does that do? But it creates pain. And it's the idea of, hold on, I can't get out.
Right.
Marriage in 2020 is like a Chinese finger trap.
That's such a great
I can't get out,
Yeah.
So they're pulling and pulling. And the thing is, we weren't taught with, this is how you deal with pain. We were taught, get out, escape the pain. And we've got to realize that, how do you get out of a Chinese finger trap? Do you remember?
Yeah, you actually push in. You push in, right? Is that right? If I'm remembering.
Absolutely, you got it.
Oh, that's such a good analogy.
And when we push in, we create a little bit of space, which provides a little bit of freedom for us to end up escaping. And so I encourage couples all the time, can you lean into some of that pain and some of that old pattern that you had, realizing it may not have been the healthiest thing that you did, but is there a way that you can kind of lean into it to create a little bit of freedom to create choices? Yeah,
that's so good. That's so good. I love that analogy. You talked about it a little bit on the beginning of that, on your response there. We typically do what was modeled for us, right? Or we do the opposite. Like what I saw in my parents or my caregivers,
don't do that.
That was so unhealthy. I'm going to go to the other extreme.
Right.
I saw my parents explode on each other, so I'm never going to ever get in an argument with my spouse. I'm never going to bring up anything I'm upset about because I just saw how that affected me. I saw how it affected them. And so we don't always have models for how to do that. And it takes time, right? We have these habits that are ingrained in us maybe since childhood.
That's right.
We bring them into a marriage and we have expectations that, well, my spouse is going to see the world the same way I do. And then we can kind of, first 6 months, we kind of avoid that and everything's
honeymoon
not
phase.
That big honeymoon phase, right? And then all of a sudden life happens, that wears off.
Right.
And we find ourselves in stuck in bad patterns.
That's right.
And so we have to learn things, right? We have to be honest and open, and we have to do it in doing that together.
Right.
So Leslie, I mean, just to kind of wrap it up here, because I wish we could talk about this for hours, I know. But one of my favorite quotes that I actually have on my computer is this quote that says, the grass isn't greener on the other side, it's greener where you water it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that applies to a lot of areas of life, but especially in a marriage relationship. So, thinking about that quote, just talk to the individual or maybe the couple, or but maybe they're feeling like, hey, we just feel like we're stuck and nothing's growing and we can't get anywhere. Or I feel like I'm just sick and tired of being the only one watering our relationship.
Right.
And they don't seem, they've given up, or they've just kind of accepted this is what it is, and basically feeling kind of hopeless.
Yeah.
Maybe even thinking about throwing in the towel or looking for greener grass on the other side.
Right.
Just talk to that person who might be in that kind of situation.
Yeah.
How do we find hope in this season we're in?
Yeah. Those type of, when that situation comes in, my heart breaks for that person.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to empathize with them, because when you feel like you're giving everything that you can give, you start to feel hopeless, and you're looking at the other person through a negative lens, thinking they're not doing anything.
Right.
And over time, when I've looked at somebody and thinking, and I'm thinking to myself, I keep trying, and they're not doing anything, it's difficult to see any good in the other person.
Right.
And we commonly refer to that in counseling as negative sentiment override. And I think of it in terms of, if you think about a coal miner, they have the helmet on and they've got the light up top, and they're digging and digging and digging with the idea of, I'm going for that piece of coal. But if their buddy next to them talks to them, they're going to be distracted. They're going to look over. They're not going to keep digging.
Right.
They're going to look over here. Yeah. But then they have to go back and they have to keep digging. And what they focus on, they get more of. Similarly in marriage, what I focus on, I get more of. If I've been repeatedly hurt by somebody else's behavior, I can think that, I feel like I'm doing good things. I feel like I'm trying really hard, but there's no way that you aren't going to have enough bitterness in your heart that you're always going to be doing the right thing. I think it's really important just to look at your pattern of thought and say, you know what, first of all, I'm a bride of Christ. My spouse is my spouse, but most importantly, my marriage is to God. So how do I keep that relationship alive? Good. And when I'm focusing on that relationship, I can see some sparkle of when I stated it earlier, when I lay my head down on the pillow at night, I feel good about myself. So realizing that when I look at my spouse and I can see even the little light of goodness, and I can focus on that, and then I let the other person know how I've been blessed by their behavior, or that I see their intent as good. When I'm affirming that, I'm starting to develop positive sentiment override. I'm starting to say, I'm finding the good in the other person. Now, it's not to say that all relationships are going to be fixed just because you try to see the good in the other person. Right. I always tell people, especially when they come in for individual counseling, but their complaint is mostly about the marriage, I say, is there any way that we can bring that person in, or I can help you find a marriage counselor as well? If I've been working with that person individually for a while, especially, I want to refer them to marriage counseling. But it's important to recognize, again, the patterns that we have developed over time. We can only make changes thinking that I'm trying to do the best for a certain amount of time, and then we do want to throw in the towel. I love your saying of the idea of we have to water the grass that we're standing on, because that's what's going to end up flourishing. And part of watering the grass involves trying to see positively the intent of the other person. That's
so good. And I think as Christians, when the world would say all hope is lost, we always can have hope that Jesus is at work and he's pursuing our spouse, right? Just like he's always pursuing us and everyone's pursuing us. Even when it feels like our spouse isn't responding, that God is pursuing them to be gracious to them. And I know not everything works out. It does take two people to want to work on a marriage. And so that there are times where, of course, it doesn't work out as I know God intended it to. But I think if we continue to, see ourselves as the bride of Christ, as you said, and know that that's what Jesus, see how much he loves them as well. Focusing on that. And then obviously, but there are times where it does take support. It does take help. It does. And I think too often we're too ashamed to say, hey, we need help. Our relationship, we're stuck. or we realize we're not stuck, we're going backwards.
Yeah.
Like we need to bring other people, trusted friends, trusted relationships, and sometimes professionals, and to help us see things in a new light, to see our own sin, to see our own faults, but that when we're willing to pursue God, that there's always hope. Like that God is always wanting to give us hope and is pursuing us. So
it's always difficult for me when I see people come into counseling with the idea of this is our last ditch effort.
Yeah.
You know, it's heartbreaking to me when people come in as well. We've tried everything else, so we figured we'd try counseling, and I just think, oh, I wish that people would come in when they see a little bit of problems, when they're hurting.
Yeah. When there's a little crack in the road versus a giant chasm.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
You know, before it gets to the point of you're thinking the grass might be greener.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's so true. And I find that when I meet with people too, it's almost like it's a last resort to come talk to me versus like being proactive in it. But that there's no chasm that God can't close.
This is true.
The miracle, I mean, that's what the beauty of Jesus. There's always hope. So I think we can hold on to that truth as well. Well, I think we could, like I said, we could go on and talk about this for hours.
What next?
Thank you. I just want to say thank you so much,
My pleasure.
Leslie, for your time.
Absolutely.
And I know, I'm sure this was just super helpful and edifying and encouraging to many of you. And just want to say, you know, feel free to reach out to me and I can put you in contact with Leslie if she would be a help to any of you. And so just thank you so much for doing this, having this conversation.
Thanks for having me.